All right. So for this present futures, Chris, I wanted to bring this up because I think this is something you and I probably both follow pretty closely as well, is quantum computing. Quantum computing. So I have a funny story I want to start this off with, right? So years ago, I was at Accenture's office, right? And I was, at their thinking group, right? They have like a group that is, putting out like their future studies topics and things like that. I had a guy sit down to me, and when he was interviewing me for the position, he said, "Hey, what do you think is going to be the next thing, in the next 20, 30 years is going to have the biggest impact?" And I wanted to say AI, but I didn't want to say AI because I think everybody had said AI, even, 6 or 7 years ago when this was happening, or 8 years ago when this was happening. And I said quantum computing. And I told him why I thought quantum computing was going to be the thing. And he thanked me, and, at the end of it, and then I got a call back. I didn't get the job. And the guy said, "Hey, you sounded too salesy." And I said, "Too salesy? Quantum computing is too salesy to you." So it was a really interesting, 8 years, like probably 12, 15 years ago, right? And this has happened. And I said, "All right, that's cool. Thanks for that." And now we see where the consulting firms are going right now. So I think I'm in a good place. But I thought that was a really interesting subject, right? Because no one was really thinking about quantum computing like on a larger scale 10, 15 years ago, right? People were thinking, "Oh, hey, this is something cool. There's a lot of research going into this." But it's still light years away, right? It's kind of like how I think nuclear fusion was viewed and is currently being viewed, right, by multiple players, right? It's always 10, 15 years away. But quantum computing is making some serious inroads now, right? There's a lot of things happening right now, and the importance of quantum computing is growing because of the importance of AI growing, right? Because the idea that you could do so much more with AI if you had quantum computing in reality, that is now becoming a thing that's no longer in the realm of fiction, right? So I wanted to show this article right here, right? So, and it's like a couple of different articles are saying this right now, right? So the idea that quantum computing could be over a $1 trillion business by 2030, that's 10 years away. And that's a really interesting point. And multiple articles are bringing up this $1 trillion mark, this $1.5 trillion mark, right? And a lot of companies are making significant investments in quantum computing. The same companies, surprisingly, that are also making investments in AI. So Google and Microsoft and IBM. So all of these companies are looking at this space and saying, "Oh, well, hey, if we could make quantum computing happen, then, this is something that, it will change the world." And I still believe that. It's something, I said it 10, 15 years ago when I was talking to Accenture, and I'm saying it now. I honestly think that quantum computing is going to be the next game changer now outside of AI. And one thing, probably our listeners or people watching are saying, "What the heck is quantum computing?" Right? And look at. So quantum computing, but basically what it is it harnesses the principles of quantum mechanics, right? So you can perform really complex calculations that classical computers just can't do, right? So it uses these qubits, which can exist in a superposition of states. Think of it both 0 and 1 simultaneously, which is unlike a normal computer that can only be 0 or 1. And what that allows is, think of it, something that could take hundreds of years calculation wise could then be shrunk down into a matter of hours, right? Because then you're multiplying those zeros and ones over multiple zeros and zeros and ones, and you're getting really, really advanced computing. And it basically works in this quantum sphere where things are different in that stage, right? So that's a very different state of being than what we currently exist in, right? But the idea is that it could be used to really advance artificial intelligence to a point where we can't even understand what it could do, right? It could also be used for drug discovery, materials discovery, innovation. So quantum computing is a really exciting topic. I've talked enough. Chris, tell me your thoughts on quantum computing, because I could talk all night.
Yeah, no, 100%. So I mean, I think if everybody said what's been one of the major breakthroughs, right? Besides things like, I don't know, like proper healthcare or something along those lines, Listerine, the ability to wash our hands and make sure we're not dying of stuff like that. Obviously, that's really important, yes. But frankly, what is the thing that's driven the human economy, more than any? It's been computers, IT technology, information technology. It's the biggest firms in the world. Obviously, AI is pushing the world right now, supercomputing, all the rest, right? Like from forecasting to silly memes on your phone to the ability to do high frequency trading. and manipulate markets all around the world. Like computational technology has accelerated the global economy, it accelerated global innovation, it's assisted and aided us in so many different ways. So now we're saying, let's do that, but let's do it supercharged and not through this, as you noted, this ones and zeros, but do it through atoms, the ability to affect things in superposition so we can actually go even deeper in terms of computational output. And as you noted, right, there are very specific things that we will be doing in the future with quantum computing, drug discovery, the ability to create drugs on the fly through molecular simulations in general. So actually imagine having a twin of your relative, because that we are able to actually fine tune all of their adjustments, not only from like maybe social media posts, but actually even imagery and whatnot, being able to like have and focus on family dynamics, material creation, the ability to create material not only inside of your body, so be able to like use the quantum computing, like robots. We talk, this is like an old idea in future studies, but robots inside your body fixing nanobots. Quantum computing will have that ability to not only create stuff inside of you, but create stuff in space as well. This is where space exploration actually, becomes possible, because you have an ability to create a material science in unique ways, optimizing everything. So whether it's the economy, whether it is climate change action, whether it is global supply chains, market simulations, where you can, a company can understand the effects of, adding a price here or creating an object there. And there's just an infinite amount. And as you noted, it's a $1 trillion possibility. I think it's still somewhat like seen as extremely futuristic. And so its implementations are still not completely there. There really hasn't been the, quantum computing company. I think, there's many companies that are vying for that. IBM and Microsoft obviously are some. I will not doubt that some of the larger AI companies as well, just large infrastructure companies. You think that the global cloud providers, the Amazons, the Microsofts, and the Googles of the world are inching to get to this quantum computation as quickly as they can, along with some of the larger providers, as I was saying, IBM. But frankly, the possibilities are endless, because it has this way of just impacting every single thing we do, and that much quicker, that much faster. Even like instantaneous internet, like some of this stuff is just so wild, and it's really not that far.
Well, I'll tell you one of the wildest things, Chris,
Yeah.
is, and I'm going to get your perspective on this because we've talked about this, right, on
Correct.
this podcast, right, is
8 years ago.
Yeah. Well, the brain could potentially be a quantum computer. But one thing that we talked about, right, is that, they're now doing research to say maybe our brains exist at some point in the quantum space, and that our brains are quantum computers. So think about that for the implication for AI, right? I mean, that's crazy.
Yes. Yeah. And, one thing to note, and I was listening to, Michio Kaku, the great astrophysicist or physicist in general. And he was actually saying, yes, like a plant or a flower actually is faster, maybe even than a quantum computer. So we're working our way there too, but this is our direction. This is our way to get there. And actually, what is the next thing after the quantum computer and quantum computing comes out? Well, quantum computing can actually tell us what it is, because it has that ability to go there. So this is it is that idea, right? It's the Promethean sort of thing. And I think, it's like an idea right when computational, when IT started happening. When I think remember when we did, 8 years ago, and we showed everybody the mother of all demos, right? And we had, what's his name there in Stanford, and he was showing the desktop, and he had the very first mouse and the very first word processing, and he had like a Zoom call. He had like a person come up and like have a conversation, right? And this was in 1968, and anybody who was in there, whether it was Xerox or it was Steve Wozniak, Steve Jobs, they saw this and there was like, what if we could do this through computers? What if we could do this through our phone? Like, this is going to change everything. We're going to be able to connect and interconnect in unique ways. That idea in 1968 honestly led to our current world that we're in. And of course, all the different positive and negative implications of that world and what's going on with it. And I think that's where we're at. We're actually, I'm really waiting for a demo, right? A possibility. I want a future. We talk about this a lot, right? The future, it really exists when you can step in it. And I think that's what I'm waiting on, right? I don't just want to see the
Yes.
pictures with the quantum and the gold and it's like a thing and you just see it, and I actually want to see it used in some sort of demonstration. And I think it's going to get people really, really excited. But absolutely, it is $1 trillion idea.
Well, there's a lot of the issues right now. So we're in the early stage, right, of quantum computing. They're saying realistically we might have real applications for it until like 2035, 2040, right, like that era, right, which makes sense for the $1 trillion, right? Because I think AI quickly became probably as closer, it's in the billions to trillions right now of space, right? Because there's the billions being invested in it right now. So like that is, it's not unrealistic to think that when quantum computing comes out, even if it's 2035, when it's like, becomes really commercially viable, right? Because there are early stage quantum computers right now. A lot of people can't access, right? And there still is a lot, you can only run for a little short amount of time and there's a lot of errors, right? But the idea is that as soon as it comes out, it could become this huge industry. It makes sense, right? Because it could change so many different industries: medicine, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence. All of these different things are now could be affected with the usage of quantum computers. So I know it sounds like in this realm of science fiction, but I mean, artificial intelligence 10, 15 years ago sounded like it was in the realm of science fiction. Now, we don't have AGI, right? But we have really useful applications for artificial intelligence that I'm sure you and I use every day, many of our listeners and viewers. So I think that this is something that is really interesting. We need to pay attention to. And as an investor, right, myself, right, I'm going to be investing in these companies because a lot of people are, right? Because, the first ones that come up with quantum computers, it's going to change all these industries, just like artificial intelligence. So what's nice is that those are public companies. And so those public companies are going to be the ones investing in this space. And it's really hard to build a quantum computer. You need a lot of resources, right? It's not like you can really do a startup in this space, although I'm sure people are trying. So I think that's a really exciting aspect of this, is that there's so much potential in the space, a lot of effort being put into it, a lot of investment currently being put into the space. So it's not a question of if in my mind, although some scientists, Meta is OpenAI, Meta and OpenAI, and like people, artificial intelligence people are saying, oh, it's never going to be real, but they're not quantum computing people, right? You have to be able to differentiate them from, the actual people who are doing this research. I think it is going to be a real thing, and I think we're going to see it in some exciting applications, probably sometime in the next 10, 15 years. So it's,
Absolutely. And
yeah,
and I think it's not only that it's real, but it's going to be a game changer. It's just that, like I said, we haven't been led through it. There hasn't been like, here's the app that opens it up. A sort of an iPhone situation, right? It's like that's the thing. That's how we actually make that happen. Or the laptop, or whatever XYZ, personal computing system that we had that sort of led to the next evolution of where things. We just haven't had that moment for it. When we do have it, though, that's I think when it opens the floodgates. And frankly, I think this also it answers a lot of questions too on like what is how does AI change jobs? Well, frankly, like AI is not the only thing that's going to be changing the economy. So is quantum computing. By the way, all this stuff is highly technical. It's highly complex. You can't just turn it on and put it in a corner. There has to be a whole, infrastructure of people's, of marketing, of controlling, of creation. So when I see stuff like this, right, like it excites me because I'm like, oh, there's a whole other potential explosion of industries and things and innovations, the things that were impossible for us to do now can be opened because we have technology in front of us. And it's very similar to, again, what the IT world had just 50, 60, 70 years ago, right? It's the technology we have is so much different, than that we had in the 1920s and 30s, and obviously, 100, 150 years ago. And it led to all these jobs and all this economic output and people doing stuff. Quantum
yes.
computing has that ability to get us to the next level as well, to get us as a point to deal with this possible, employment issue that's coming up with AI, whether that's real or not. I think actually it's just so exciting because there's just so many different areas that can be impacted in honestly a positive way. And I'm really, really looking forward to seeing that future come.
One final note I'll put there is I think you hit something really interesting, right? So in your future studies, right, we study this space. I think as much as things change, things stay the same. So I can honestly see the way that quantum computing developing, right? Because some people are saying, oh, we'll never have a quantum computer laptop, right? That just won't happen, right? Well, they said the same thing about the computer, right? They say, it took up an entire, wing, right, then down to rooms. So I think that's what's going to happen with quantum computing. You're going to have these large facilities that have a quantum computer in there. It's going to be really expensive. And then I think it's going to get miniaturized. And then you'll see more and more interesting aspects of it. Maybe in 50 years, you'll have a quantum computer that you can access, from your home. Like that I think is an interesting way to look at and see maybe that's the future of the space and something that's going to be cool to look at.